Okay, hey guys, we are live and we are ready to rock and roll today with the Industry 4.0 Club. Thank you guys so much for joining us today as we're wrapping up Hannover Messe from this last week with our top takeaways. My name is Wyatt. I'm a co-founder of the Industry 4.0 Club. And when I'm not hanging out with these amazing people from I-40, I am usually running my own recruiting business, but I'll pass it over to Jason. We'll go ahead and dive in because we've got some really exciting topics for you today.
I'm Jason Bean, I'm the co-founder of the Industry 4 Club, and when I'm not working with the club, I am the IoT market specialist for Preppel and Fuchs. I'll hand it over to Lucian to introduce himself.
Yeah, Lucian Fogoros, IIoT-World co-founder, spent 20 years in industrial software, but when I'm not doing everything online, that's what we do with IIoT-World. I'm partnering with events like Hannover Messe and others. Kevin?
And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Kevin O'Donovan. I'm here with Lucian all week at the Hannover Messe. I spend my time looking at new technologies and the implications of those technologies, primarily in the energy industry. My background was I used to head up Intel's sales and marketing into the energy sector for about 10 years. So I've been independent consultant for the last 5. But here with Lucian and others for the week, kind of wandering around all the halls, looking at the latest and greatest. So I suppose just wanted to share what I came across and then have a chat and a discussion, and if anyone has any questions. We were chatting here just before we came on, and I suppose the main thing, we had Hannover Messe in 2019, and then we had COVID. So I suppose kind of the background for turning up here on Monday was everybody was delighted to be back. The place was pretty busy. The COVID is not over, and the whole supply chain issues are not over. The tragic consequences of the Russian invasion of Ukraine are still ongoing, just a couple of thousand miles from here. And the implications on supply chains and was kind of top of people's minds. So kind of rolled that all together, and then I kind of was looking at the technologies and whatever. So I suppose the 3 things that kind of popped out to me was that everywhere you went was it's Industry 4.0 on steroids, and I'll explain that in a sec. The second one was around, while everything's going digital and digital twins, we shouldn't forget the people. People aren't going away.
That's
and
right.
The third one was then probably around the fact that there were some standout things. And what I mean by that was hydrogen is a big thing over here. And also sustainability, and how do I simulate products and know their sustainability? And because of the supply chain issues coming down the line, how can I swap things around and know the impacts of those? So they were kind of the 3 things. And then it's like anything, there was a bunch of other weird and wonderful things I came across, but that was kind of my list, so we can take it from there.
Yeah, no, this is amazing. I've never been to Hanover. It sounds like so much fun. And I want to start out with that topic about, it's live again. The last one was in 2019 in person, right? And this is the first year we've been able to do Hanover in a few years, and that's really exciting. So what's that experience like? Kind of give us a rundown of what being there live is like, what the energy is like, how everybody's reacting to being together again after the pandemic.
Well, I'll go, and Lucy, and then you can chime in. There's obviously the thing of, hey, we're back, and over all 4 days you're wandering around and you're seeing people going, hey, I haven't seen you in such a long time, and high fives and whatever. Now, there's not a lot of hugging going on, and there's still face masks with some people. It's a personal preference, but it's just being back in person. I would say that and this is my own personal opinion, walking around the halls, I think it was busier in 2019, but that said, we still have things like many of the companies out of China probably weren't here, right? So you kind of miss that because of the travel bans or the COVID bans and stuff. There was a bit more empty space in some of the halls, so it was more, and that was by design as well, to keep people away from each other, so you can kind of walk around without bumping into everyone. But certainly it was back. But the other thing that I thought was quite interesting, for transparency, I was there with Siemens for 1 or 2 days as well. Siemens and many others are kind of going after the hybrid model. So like all of the on-stage presentations at the Siemens stand were all live streamed for 4 hours a day. If you didn't want to turn up for an in-person tech workshop, you could go to a virtual tech workshop. If you wanted to get a booth tour, you got a virtual one. There was other companies doing that as well. So I think people are going, yeah, we're all great to be back, but maybe not everyone will travel all the time. So we need to maximize our investment on site and broadcast it or record it or use it in other ways as well. That was my 2 cents.
Yeah, I echo on the hybrid side. I think that's a direction we see more and more companies. Now, having said that, I enjoyed every bit. This is my 3rd in-person at Hannover. Always a lot of great energy, meeting people. Yes, if you want to see what people see, in addition to the fact that, yes, it's great to see you, but there is a question for companies. The first question is like, if you look at when a visitor, an end user asks, like, when can you ship it? So there's a lot of those questions popping around. Now, having said it, we're 100% an online version. Why do we go to some of these events? Well, if you look at the European companies, they align their press releases of new products with Hannover Messe. Now, this they had to delay a little bit, so they may have to do something else. If you look at the North American market, depending on which industry, if you're in the manufacturing, you may be going to ARC, which is normally in February, but now it's next week. So now we're a little bit delayed in there. So a lot of the innovation is aligned with some of these big events, whether it's Hannover Messe, whether it's ARC, or you go to Distributech to launch your new products. So I think that's been traditionally how they've launched the products. They make a big splash during an event. So
the other thing, I suppose, and I'm a big fan of the whole hybrid and whatever, but I think the one thing with and this is my own personal opinion, you see things online, but you kind of go after the stuff online that you want to look at. It's like looking at the news online, right? It's only when you're walking around the hall that you spot something that you never even, I don't know, what's that? And you kind of lose that serendipity when you're not there in person, because you kind of get tunnel vision, if that makes sense. So I came across a lot of things that I didn't even know existed just by walking around the hall. So that's hard to replace online.
Definitely, absolutely, yeah. That's the thing with being virtual, is you kind of miss that walking around and seeing the things in person and seeing the demonstrations and all the excitement about the new stuff that's coming out, for sure. I'm going to take just a minute and add our friend Ryan Therese to the conversation. Hey there, Ryan. How are you?
Hey, Ann. Hey, everyone. How's it going? I'm doing well. Thank you.
Hey, Ryan.
We're good. We just got started. So we just talked a little bit about what it's like being back at live events, which is something I know you go to trade shows a lot yourself, and Jason as well. So that's something I think we're all pretty excited about, being there live. But we were just kind of going to transition the conversation maybe a little bit into, how we're making this happen with COVID, how we're doing it safely, and why there's so much value in the live events and being there in person. So Kevin, I don't know if you want to jump in on that, or Jason or Lucian, if you guys want to give us some feedback on that.
Well, I suppose this has not been my first event. I was back at events back in September last year in Europe. We started opening up. The protocols then were very different. So every stand had to be designed so there was a one-way flow, sanitizers, face masks, 1.5 meter distance. So this was less. It was personal preference for folks, right? So this was far more back to what I would call normality. Yet people are conscious, right? So self-tests every day and whatever. But it was kind of, people are people. And as I say, my guess is that anyone that, as Lucian was saying earlier, anyone who was here was that it was like, hey, I haven't seen you in 2 years or 3 years, or I've seen you on Zoom every week, but it's not the same, right? And right. Going for a beer or a coffee or a cup of whatever, it's just different. And you can ask the questions that you may not ask in the Zoom call, right? So it's hard to beat I do a lot of stuff in VR and whatever, right? Geek. but at the same time, human nature is human nature. Real face to face is different.
Yeah, and I would comment I had a conversation this afternoon with an executive, and he says he's got some sort of a tool that monitors the emails, and he prioritizes based on the rules. But one of them, it's also from folks that he doesn't really know, is how persistent it will be to check up on a follow up on an email. So if you look at it over the last couple of years, everybody has been home, communicate via email, and how do you prioritize it with the amount of emails to do that? So the in-person, you make that instant connection. I walked in another booth, and it was great to just kind of have that conversation there, and that probably over the email it would be a lot more difficult, or even getting them on Zoom to get them to pay attention. So now
Definitely.
everybody should look at the ROI, right? I always think if you don't measure it, then it doesn't matter where you do it. So if you have a KPI while you do it, it's always a simple thing. Divide what you spent on what you got. So it should be, that's why we're focusing only on the online events, but I also see a lot of value going in person. So we do the hybrid, meaning we digitize some of these events so the content live behind this 1 week here in Hanover or next week in Orlando.
And if I may, I know quite a few folks in the different companies around here. Because it's 4 days, they'll normally have one day where they'll wander around and see what the competitors are doing, right? Because it's a great way of seeing it, as opposed to registering online for their online event or a customer event where you won't get in. So in terms of just competitive intelligence, you can't be the trade shop for just wandering around and going, well, what's new, what's cool, how are they positioning this, what are they saying? So that's an angle.
Definitely, yeah. Before we kind of hopped on this live, you had a really good quote about what Hanover was like, and that's something I'm very interested. I would love to go. That just sounds like so much fun. I would totally be that neurodivergent person, like picking things up and just like looking at them and asking them all the questions. So that sounds like a great experience for me. Something I'd love to do. But I kind of want to dive into that quote you gave us right before we hopped on the live about what the experience of Hanover is actually like, and what that means for Industry 4.0.
Well, I suppose the way I'd clarify what I saw for the last 4 days is Industry 4.0 on steroids. And what I mean by that is Industry 4.0 is not new, right?
Right.
I don't know, 10 years people have been talking about it, at least. And we've been talking about digitalization and automation and autonomous and blah, blah, blah. And a lot of it was PowerPoint slides and bits and pieces. But when you walked around most of the halls for the last couple of days, it was just like drinking from a fire hose. And what I mean by that is that, so I look at robots as one of the cool technologies.
Yeah.
So in my world, in oil and gas, in utilities, you have companies like Boston Dynamics with Spot, Animal from Antibiotics out of Switzerland. So these are like the doggy robots walking around. They're
Yes.
robotic sensor platforms. So you do automatic inspection of power plants and whatever. So they were there, right? But what was also there, and there was hundreds of them, all different shapes and sizes, of the autonomous robots that you would use on a shop floor to move stuff around. Big stuff, small stuff, whatever, self-charging, how you control them, everything. So in 2019, you could find a couple of these things as like kind of look at the prototype we're building. Today it was just like, here's all the different models we're selling. And this crowd have 1,000 of them, and this crowd have 10,000 of them, and here's a demo of the factory or whatever. So I was just going, God, that's kind of taken off. Digitalization, well, software, it's just kind of a given, and this is how you configure it. But the other thing as well was that it's not just about digitalization, but the material science. We're using this material instead of that material because it's bigger, faster, better, whatever. The chemistry of stuff. I come to hydrogen later. Hydrogen's a thing over here. 5G. A lot more people talking about 5G, private 5G, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
We're seeing a lot of spectrum being opened up, allocated here. So companies are looking at, well, if I do want to have all the autonomous stuff and I do want to have a bit more augmented reality for kind of the connected worker, I need more bandwidth. And how do I do that? Is 5G an option? And is it a rip and replace? Can I replace some of the stuff I have? So a lot of chats, Siemens, others, a lot of the telcos were here talking about their 5G. Now, obviously, you get into the public-private merged 5G networks, but certainly private 5G for industry was suddenly becoming a thing. So when I say steroid, it was, I personally didn't find any new technology that was like, oh my God, that's brand new, and it made the headlines. Like there wasn't a lot of headlines out of Hannover this year, right? In terms of a massive announcement. But it was just, everything was just bigger, faster, better. Everyone finding ways of using technology we've been talking about for 10 years, but actually productively, if that makes sense.
So I think this is but I think that's a great point, because, you know, a large part of the conversation that happens, especially on the LinkedIn manufacturing community, is around digital transformation and how to digitalize and what are the steps and what all it entails, because it's a huge undertaking, right? It's like its own machinery, right? There's bits and pieces and parts moving everywhere. And it's like, how do we do this effectively, efficiently, and in a way that makes the most sense for our company? But I think that's a really great statement, because what I think you're essentially saying, it was all there. You saw all the pieces, which is a really rare experience, I think, because it's, you know, usually you see one piece. You talk about digital twins, you know, or we talk about connected worker, or we talk about robots, but this really allows you the experience to see it all in one place and kind of that.
Oh, sorry.
If I may jump in just a little bit. So one of the surprising factor for me, like if I look at 3 years ago, there was a 5G arena, right? So manufacturing being a big use case for 5G, you saw that. So now it almost seems like, you know, telecoms moved in one hole, the traditional players on a separate hole, and they are focused on the solution versus what 5G might be. So there was no 5G arena this year. That was a surprising factor. Now you can blame it on various factors, but that wasn't there.
It's when a technology kind of becomes just piece of the puzzle, as opposed to here's a new technology. Ooh, cool. What'll this do?
Yes.
But if I may, you know, if you look at like digitalization, right? I also believe it depends on the company and where you are. During COVID, some people had a revolution in their digitalization strategy because they started working from home and using online Zoom and couldn't use pen and paper. So that was a revolution for them. And yet Dassault Systems had a digital twin experience in a room where you put on a VR headset, portable PC, walked around with a bunch of other people inside a virtual digital twin. So if you say digitalization versus Zoom call versus I'm in a digital twin, they're two very different levels of digitalization. And there's no right or wrong, right? But all I could think of was that it wasn't just demos and proof of concepts of cool stuff anymore. As Lucian said, it was just like, how do you make money out of this stuff, right?
No, exactly. So I've got a couple of comments here in the chat that if you don't mind, is that okay? If I think we've got some comments here. Sean McCoy says, hello from all 2022 in San Jose, Santa Clara. Great insights as usual from this crowd. Love the perspectives. Well, thank you, Sean. Renaten says, hi from Colorado. As a business psychologist focused on this aspect, I'd love to hear more about how people are emphasized. Yes, well, that actually is a great transition to my next topic here for you. Another quote that you kind of wanted to elaborate on, Kevin, before we got started today, was the industrial internet of people. And I think you just briefly kind of touched on that about the metaverse and stuff. But yes, let's talk about this. This is my favorite topic. Let's talk.
Right. So I didn't coin that. It was actually okay, full transparency, because if you look at my thing, Sean McCoy, who I know, he's at AWE. That's the VR AR conference, whatever. But he had put me in touch with a company that he knows, Guard Hat, out of I think it's Detroit in the US. So I dropped by Industrial Hat, all the push to talk, sensors, camera, whatever. But they also have a whole ecosystem of software and tools for the connected worker. But it was, let me get my notes. Sarah Calhorn, their marketing manager, she said, because we were chatting about digital twins and whatever. And she made a comment, and this is the quote from her, was that we keep talking about digital twins and we're taking all the data and we have static models and we have physics models and process models and blah, 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 and 3D models, but we never integrate the humans into it. Because the humans are what, if it's a digital twin of a real asset, there will be a real human walking around in that asset. So how do we overlay that? Not many people are talking about that. And the industrial internet of people is their term. So I stole that. So they get the credit for that.
Borrow that. I love that.
I thought it was quite interesting, because if you do look at so there was many companies there. You had RealWare, you had companies with Vuex, you had Microsoft HoloLens, you had folks with different VR, AR glasses, not just from Facebook, but from all the industrial players as well. So training, how do I do virtual commissioning? I came across a couple of companies that had exoskeletons. Now, they're not exoskeletons as in like, there's a robotics company in the US, which is a thing like you see in Aliens, right? These are more that they're kind of pulley based, but they give you support for lifting things and whatever. But there was a particular company, tiny, small, and again, I never heard of them. I was walking past them. I think I put a video on LinkedIn or something. Noonee, Noonee. So they have this kind of harness that you can kind of sit on, so it supports your back. But they had another, I think, startup with him called ScaleFit, and he had sensors on him, and he was showing that if you bend over in real time, so he'd like a digital twin of himself as he's bending over, and I was showing the pressure on his lumbar spine or his shoulder, the way he was twisting. And then when he sat down, it took all the pressure off. So it was like a real-time digital twin of the stress on the body as I was kind of lifting stuff around.
That's awesome. And then you were able to see the visual impact of it, right? It's like, have you ever been to like the Sleep Number store and you lay down and they show you all that? It's kind of like that, yeah?
And he was doing this, and on the screen, his digital twin was doing the same thing. And then when he bent over, his lumbar spine thing would go red because it would show the pressure. So the amount of things where we can start, can we integrate humans a lot more? Yes, we can. Are we? No, not yet. And granted, now once you get into humans and privacy and monitoring your heart rate, and there's all sorts of reasons why I would do that, because heat stroke or bad situations. But you do get into the thing that Lucian's monitoring me and he thinks I have a heart problem, and I don't know I have a heart problem. So how does he? So there are some things around that. But I do think the how people are emphasized. And the last thing I would just say, something I hadn't seen. Festo, they announced a new, well, to me it was new. They're the first pneumatic, they call it a cobot. I hadn't heard of this word. So I typically think of industrial automation as, the guys making the cars, these massive machines doing welding. But this was like a human arm, 7 axis, and it's there just to simply help someone doing a repetitive job on the desk beside you. It's not going to swing around at 1,000 miles an hour and take your head off.
Right.
And you train it by just pressing a button and taking it and moving it. And it was like to help a person sitting at a desk do stuff repetitively. So a very different concept. So that again was kind of the human element. And the robots and all this stuff they're here to help. They're not going to take all our jobs, because most of the stuff they're going to do is stuff we don't want to do in the first place, right?
Preach. Yes, exactly. Everybody is always, that's just such that's something we're always railing against, right? It's like the robots are doing the stuff you actually don't want to do, so you can do more meaningful things, and you can be more productive, and you can be more creative, because there's not a lot of creativity that goes into all of these repetitive tasks. And I think that people are we're creative by nature, right? And we want that. We need that moral sense of accomplishment. Of it just builds morale when you get more out of being creative and being collaborative, instead of just doing the repetitive task all day that is boring, right? No, that's awesome. I love cobots. I think I've had the privilege to see a few in person, and they're a great option. I don't think I've seen any that do like sit on the desk, but I've seen some that are like for picking and packing and sorting and things like that. And it was amazing being able to be that that close. I've never been that close to a running robot, where you can touch it. And it's
you'll see videos online. Now, when I say sitting on a desk, it's obviously nailed or whatever, screwed onto the desk. You need a pneumatic 4-bar feed, so you kind of don't take it around. But they had it there, and like you go to a show like this, and the industrial robots behind safety glass, because in case it hits anyone.
Right.
This is on a desk, and they're getting people to go up, and while it's working, you just grab it and pull it, and it's not going to turn around and hit you.
That's awesome.
I was going, that's pretty clever. Now I think it was 3 kilos it can lift. So it's not going to replace a forklift or something, but it's that us humans will be working with these things more and more, and the way you train it, you don't need a PhD in computer robotic simulation to train it what to do. You just press the button and lift it, and you move it around, then it does the exact same thing over and over again. So I found that fascinating. I hadn't seen that before.
That's awesome. Jason, Ryan, do you want to jump in with your comments on that as well? I know both of you go to trade shows too. What are some of the cool cobots and stuff you've seen out there?
Yeah, I think no specific applications kind of stick out, but I love the concept of the cobot being able to actually grab it and work alongside it. Normally in the factories, you have all this protective equipment, and all the robots are doing high-speed automation. And I think a lot of them have these built-in kind of safeguards in terms of the amount of force. And so you're able to kind of work alongside and quickly kind of offload that type of work, whether it's lifting a heavy part or doing different like torque down tools and things like that. So I think it's really clever. We're seeing a lot of robots being integrated, and automotive has always been a huge market for this stuff, and we're starting to see it in more verticals as well. So I think, yeah, really big fan of the cobot stuff. I'll have to check out the Festo. That sounds like a fun solution.
Yeah, I've only seen cobots at like technology showcases and trade shows. I've yet to see one actually in application in the field, and I'm just kind of waiting for that day, because I've been quite impressed with the displays I've seen, and I'm just waiting to walk in a plant one day and actually see one working alongside a person.
Yeah,
yes, I remember maybe a number of years ago, I flew out to see Harlan Robotics. I met with Mr. Rodney and he had this vision of getting a collaborative robots. So he started iRobots, went public, then he's done Harlan Robotics, Ventic, whatever it's called now. And essentially the vision was at that time to get a collaborative robot under 10K and moved on with that. So now to see them, not just in manufacturing, but I'm thinking like, hey, the next trade show, maybe I'll get one of those robots just to be able to interact with people and scan people. I don't know. That's the lead generation.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. The exoskeletons, I've not had a chance to see one of those either. But I think that's that's when you look at the manufacturing industry, and of course the injuries that can sometimes be associated from, again, doing kind of the same bending, stooping, kneeling, And all of those are things that we're very familiar with, to the point of where we have to include them in our job descriptions, but if you look at that repetitive task, you look at the longevity of your workforce, this is really going to give them an opportunity to work in this field safely for longer, and reduce the injuries, and also just increase overall health for them, which is really the ultimate goal, right? So that's
if I may, and just on the same thing about what would say on the people aspect, I think the other thing that COVID did was that it proved that we don't always have to be physically somewhere to do something because of travel, or you just don't need to be there. So the whole concept of augmented reality headsets, or see what I see, connected work with a camera, body cams, commissioning. Many companies were talking about how you can now commission and train your people remotely, or we'll work on a design remotely, because we're not all going to be in the same office at the same time, or fly somewhere for a couple of days. So that how we use technology to collaborate, in one of a better words. So that's where I kind of go off with the AR, the VR, the amount of companies. As I said, I was surprised at the amount of VR headsets that were lying around, where people were saying, well, we have a training thing, or we have a commissioning thing, or we're showing you something. So now again, it's niche, right? And I use VR a good bit. 30 minutes and my head's tired, right? So it's not that we're going to be in Ready Player One land anytime soon, but these things are kind of incrementally coming to make how we interact remotely and design stuff. And that plays in with the digital twins and the simulation tools and the rendering in the cloud and all this kind of stuff. I think that's, us humans aren't going away yet, hopefully.
Yeah, one comment to that, Kevin. I did mention on traveling and going to events and sustainability, and we should calculate that. I think one of the aspects that I was pleasantly surprised to see, that there were not just goals on some companies by 2050, I'm going to net zero. Is there a way to measure that? And I think seeing this week, full transparency, I've also spent some time in the first 3 days in a Siemens booth, and there was a product that actually take the phone or take the PLC, what was the carbon footprint in the whole supply chain? I like that about it, because it's not just a goal. Now there is a direction on measuring that.
Absolutely. Yes, that's really, because, in the States, it's very, and this is obviously just, I think, a national thing for us, but it's a very abstract concept for us still.
So I suppose here in Europe, and Jason, we were chatting earlier in terms of what's different around the world. So here in Europe, we have a lot of, let's say, pre-COVID, we had a lot of drive towards more sustainability, circular economy, carbon footprint, carbon border tax, et cetera, et cetera. We then had COVID, the supply shocks. What is it? Onshoring is a thing now, bringing things closer home. What I mean, we have to ship face masks from the other side of the planet. And that needs more manufacturing, and that means more jobs and more robots and more. But the other thing then is that we've had the entire crisis now with the supply chain coming out of the Ukraine and all the implications around that, raw materials, energy. We need to do things more sustainably. And I suppose the fascinating thing with the whole digital twin model was that, okay, let's take a digital twin. We'll design the product in a digital twin. So we complete simulation, right? Simulation is not new, but we design something to simulate. But can I now can I replace different materials? Maybe I can't get that steel from that manufacturer anymore because that steel plant just be blown up. So where do I get the steel from? And if I use that steel, is there any implication that's going to come back and bite me in terms of carbon footprint or where it's coming from or brittleness or whatever? So I do the engineering, material science simulation, but then I start feeding in what energy was that made from energy from a coal-fired power plant or from somewhere else, right? And is that going to come back and bite me? So being able to simulate all of that, and that's where this kind of Estanium network that was announced at CeBIT, and there's others. Now they're using blockchain for the certificates underneath, so it's all cool tech, blah, blah, blah. And again, none of the data is So let's say I'm supplying I'm supplying you metal, and you say, well, I want X amount of tons of this spec, whatever. So tell me the carbon footprint. So I have to go off and I have to go, well, I'm getting the raw material from wherever. They dug it out of the ground using bulldozers with diesel. It was put in a train. The train used electricity that came from nuclear power plant, came to your factory. Your factory uses wind power. You did whatever, cost X amount of energy. You shipped it to me on a train that used coal. So you can come up with a number that's the embedded footprint. Now that's hard to do, but you can do it. So then I have to send that to you, but I don't put that on a public forum because that's my competitive advantage, or maybe it's my competitive disadvantage because someone goes, oh God, we're better than him. We can use that in marketing. So but that's a peer-to-peer. I send you that, but you need to be able to know that whoever verified my number, that's correct. So that's what's being put onto a blockchain as an immutable, reputable verification from a third-party verifiers like TUF or whatever. So this is kind of where a lot of that stuff is going, and they're extending that to scope 3. So like, what happens when you recycle it? So that's probably something different. Now that's not going to suddenly be the thing for everybody. You know, questions were coming up during the week in terms of, well, if you're a big company, a Siemens, a BMW, a Airbus, yeah, this makes perfect sense. But if you're a small, here in Germany, the Mittelstand, like, what's the cost of doing this for me, right? But then you start getting in, well, what's the cost of not doing it for you? Because the way legislation and your suppliers are going to start asking you, so how do you make it simple for people? So, and then factor in is that if supply chain shocks keep happening because of jigsaw puzzles falling around, if I do replace different products, if I have to get different suppliers, near shore stuff or whatever, what's the implications of that, is good or bad? So I think that whole digital twin simulating the supply chain, that's becoming way more important than some guy with a spreadsheet, you know.
Absolutely, yeah. Deborah Dole is really into the circular economy. I don't know if you guys follow her, but she is she's fantastic, first of all, and she's just really super excited about the circular economy and has that enthusiasm, that genuine enthusiasm, you know. But that's kind of something that we've talked about before. Like, how do you determine whether or not to stay with the same material that you're using, and will we create different and new materials? Because I mean, right now in the States, the supply chain is such a huge topic of conversation, especially with metals. Steel was a very good example. Packaging is really a good example because a lot of our packaging comes from overseas. So companies are finding, different ways to package things. Is that something that we'll consider for raw materials too? Are we going to find something that's more sustainable, created or whatever? And if we do, how can we make sure that that product is better overall than it would have been in its original state?
I always find it's not my world, but I always find it fascinating that you sit down with, say, the car industry guys, and they'll go, well, we designed this car. We didn't physically make it. We just designed it for the last 5 years in a computer, PAM crash and all simulations. And I'm going, okay. So how do you simulate a crash? Oh, we have all these physics models and mathematical things and whatever. And because we know the atomic principles, for want of a better word, of the material, we know how it will bend and shape at this pressure and that angle and whatever. And I'm like, wow, okay. So then they'll say, well, if we change that out for, I don't know, graphene. Now, we've been talking about graphene for, 20 years is the next big thing, but it's still kind of 5 years away. But let's say we start using carbon fiber or graphene or something else instead of steel. They can simulate all that. Now, I find it, I just can't get my head around how can they simulate that. But how long will it take? 10 years or 15 years before it breaks? Again, they have mathematical models for this. So this can be done. They're doing it. And I do think that people are looking, it may accelerate. It's like digitalization, right? We all suddenly, the world went to Zoom and Teams and whatever. That was a accelerator. Maybe some of the supply chain stuff will also change what we took for granted in terms of, well, the paper comes from here or the plastic comes from there and it's all fine. I do think that's going to accelerate. And again, if you look at all the material science investments going on worldwide and governments and universities, and it may be the accelerator to change some of this stuff, or recycling, right? You know, it's still hard to make money in recycling in most countries. So maybe now there'll be more money in recycling. So that would be a good thing.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's the truth. Recycling's not super, obviously, I mean, recycling's not super profitable. And in the States, it's very state by state. So, you know, you really get incentivized to do it. And certain, I think Maine's got a really good program for that, in California. But, you know, it's not super widely available. I think they actually just brought our recycling back to Athens because of COVID. They had stopped it. So and I'm talking about like 2 months ago, just got our recycling back here in the city. So that's definitely something that we have to be more proactive on, for sure. And hopefully we will be able to facilitate that change, and with the help of Industry 4.0. A few closing thoughts here. I think we're about at time today. You know, you and Lucian, if you guys have any final big ideas, anything that we need to watch out for in the next coming year as far as Industry 4.0 technology goes, we'd love to hear those.
Lucian, you're on mute. Sorry
about that. Yeah, so I would say, hey, look, it's as Kevin said earlier, it's happening. Find a way to get involved, figure out what you're gonna be trying to fix, and how to extract value from the whole thing. Now, whether you have to travel to Hanover, that's up to you, as long as there are other options, or maybe a hybrid option. But definitely think, one other thought that I thought it was interesting to what Kevin said. Digital twins, yes, a lot of people talk about it. Everybody has it. There is now another term that I've learned that was like digital shadows. So I won't try to define it, because that's actually I'm taking away from ISPredict, well, one of the organization that I bumped into and stopped in and talked a little bit about how you modeling and trying to get some of the retain some of the knowledge from the existing workers into a software model. So since it's not a perfect digital twin, you don't get a whole thing, it's more of a raw data, you're creating a model. That's sort of they refer to as a shadow, digital shadow. So that's an interesting new comment for me anyways.
That's interesting. I'll have to check that out. Yeah, retaining tribal knowledge is huge.
That's a new one. The last thing I just add, and if I may, I suppose, again, kind of the prevailing thing, even though I live in the world of technology is not the problem. It's finding the right technology, investing in it, having the people, being profitable, right? It's very hard to be sustainable if you have a red bottom line. So you can do all the investment, but if you can't make it work, then whatever. And right now, technology is seen in many ways as an enabler to overcome coming out of COVID, coming out of some of the supply shocks, getting over some of the things that are happening. But it's not the answer, but it'll help us get around some of the difficulties we find ourselves on, right? The other thing just to watch from over here, there was an entire hall, like Lucy, you made a comment that a couple of years ago it was a 5G hall. The new hall, or one of the new halls this year, was hydrogen. And you'd say, well, why hydrogen? And if you look at the European Union, there's a huge investment here in hydrogen over the past couple of years. There was a European hydrogen strategy announced about 18 months ago. We have the Repower EU, which is a brand new initiative, I think a couple of $100 billion euros, in response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine to get away from Russian fossil fuels. So there's huge investment there. And where it plays into Industry 4.0 is that what you're seeing here is there's no point in investing billions in the North Sea, putting in wind farms or solar farms in Spain, investing in electrolyzers, turning it into hydrogen if there's no one going to use it. So what they're working with is industry to decarbonize things like concrete, some of the heavy industries where they need to burn something to get that temperature. And that's where things, so you see things like the Port of Antwerp or Rotterdam or certain industrial hubs, and almost every country here in Europe now has a hydrogen strategy, and they want to get their big energy users, especially the gas users, to start looking at that. And like you can start putting hydrogen into the gas pipelines in Europe, about a 40% mix, 2025. It's not going to corrode the pipes, but there are issues with it. But hydrogen and the tragic events in the Ukraine may also be something that you'll see more on that. It's not exactly Industry 4.0, but it's if you don't have energy, you don't have Industry 4.0. So
right.
And it's seen as hydrogen could be a way of Europe becoming energy independent, because like right now, what are we doing to get rid of Russian gas? We're buying more gas, LNG, from other people, including America. Now, nothing wrong with America, but if we ever beat you in the Super Bowl, you might turn off the LNG to us, right? So we need to, the geopolitics is human nature is the hard bit here, right? Technology is the easy bit.
I agree. I love that. Yeah. And I think that's something that, we really need to keep at the forefront of our minds. I think sometimes the only thing that's really keeping in our way, that's really keeping us in our way is ourselves, like keeping us, held
and
back.
I suppose just one last thing, and we talk about energy efficiency, and in Industry 4.0, people are kind of going, well, if we can save energy and it doesn't cost me too much, why wouldn't I do it, right? It's on the bottom line. But again, a huge part of the repower strategy at the European Union Commission across Europe right now is how do we reduce the amount of energy we totally consume? Because if you reduce the amount of energy, you don't need to import as much. So that and again, everywhere, and the Industry 4.0 on steroids, it was about doing more with less, right? But now it's not a PowerPoint anymore, because you can measure everything. And the systems are starting to get better, and microgrids, and people are replacing diesel generators with their own battery storage packs on site, this kind of stuff. So I think that's probably more the accelerators we'll see as well around Industry 4.0, if that makes sense.
Awesome. Jason, Ryan, anything to add really quickly before we leave for the day?
No, just thank you for hosting. It was great to see everyone, and I can't wait for the next talk. So thanks again.
Thank you for coming on. Actually, the one thing I'd like to just kind of ask at the end is, for the companies that are not European based, that are hesitant about going to Hannover, what would you say is the value in actually having them go?
So again, having said a guy that's organizing only online, I would say if you want to get into this market, and if you're in the let's say industrial space, this is the place to go. I can't think of any other show. I've always, let me put it this, the perception over the last 30 years has been then you go to Hannover, you get business. And I can attest to that just going over the last 3 years that I got more business going to Hannover. So does it happen that you go and sign, you meet someone and sign? No, but it's being here to meet some of those people. It helps. Now, in what capacity do you need to have really half a whole worth of equipment? Probably not. Maybe figure out a way to be a hybrid. And I think it's going to be make this event in Hannover live for the next 12 months from the perspective of digitize some of that, what you're introducing, and keep it going for the next few months. Kevin, anything?
I suppose, Jason, to me, it's kind of the human aspect, but I'm a huge believer of online and hybrid and whatever. So if I really want to find out about a specific thing, so like, let's say hydrogen, right? So I'm really digging into, well, how can I use hydrogen in my factory and replace boilers, whatever. You can probably do all of that. You can do all that research online. So if you have a specific topic, or what's company X doing with these robots, you can probably find that out online. What I find personally with the events like this is I don't know what I don't know. So if you were in a position to be wandering around and you kind of go, God, I never even thought of that, then why are they doing that in Europe? Or why is hydrogen important in Europe, right? What are they smoking? it's that different perspective. But if you've got a very narrow, I just want to find out about this, you can probably do that online. Now, if you want to try and buy it or sell them something, it might have to first shake hands, the initial meeting, and then follow up offline. But I think it's just, to me, it's I don't know what I don't know. So I wander around the halls and go, oh, never, didn't even know that was a thing. But that's my world.
I would be that person too, Kevin. I get it. I'd be like, what is this? Tell me.
Well, I know quite a lot of CTO type folks in this thing, and like they'll spend the day wandering around the halls just going, who else is doing what? And why are they shade? Because we all live in our own bubbles. So it's interesting just to get go into someone else's bubble for a while and figure out if you're missing something.
Exactly.
Or you see you have a competitive advantage, right? So I think it's industrial intelligence kind of stuff is kind of the main thing.
That's awesome. Well, I really appreciate you guys. I know it's getting late there, and I know you guys are tired. You guys have had a long week. But thank you so much for coming and talking to us and live from the event and everything. That's really awesome. We've appreciated it, this conversation for sure. For everybody that joined us today, thank you so much for commenting and watching. This has been a wrap on Hanover for this week. So thank you guys so much for following along, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much. Take care. Safe travels.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.